The crutch cracked against bone, my own legs screaming as the masked man lunged again. My parents' gardener, the man who'd trimmed our roses for years, reeked of motor oil and something sharper. Betrayal. The insurance policy in my hand named them as beneficiaries. 20 million reasons to want me dead. The study door rattled. No time, no escape. Just the weight of the crutch and the truth. My own family had already signed my death warrant. The paper in my fist was my only lead. A mechanic's address scrawled in grease. One chance to prove this wasn't paranoia. One chance before the next attack. And my mother's voice, smooth as poison. Darling, it was just a test. Her smile never reached her eyes. The tires churned gravel as the sedan pulled into the driveway of the Sterling estate. Caleb stepped onto the pavement, greeted by the heavy scent of damp pine and wood smoke. The house sat like a limestone fortress against the gray Connecticut sky, its many windows staring back at him with the vacant indifference of a stranger. Inside the foyer, a stack of unopened legal envelopes littered the mahogany console table. The bold red stamp of the Department of Justice glared from the top pile, a bloody thumbprint on the family's pristine reputation. Caleb's leg throbbed, a rhythmic, deep-seated ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He leaned heavily on his crutch, the cold aluminum biting into his palm. He looked at his phone. 88%, 3 bars, he whispered. The numbers a familiar anchor in a world that was rapidly drifting off its moorings. Arthur sat slumped in his leather armchair within the library, staring at a dead fireplace. His father's skin hung loose, gray like ash, and his hands trembled as he clutched a glass of amber liquid that had long since gone flat. Across the room, Eleanor adjusted a vase of white peonies, her movements precise and rigid. She flicked a speck of dust from her silk sleeve, her eyes never once drifting toward the stack of indictments in the hall. "We need to discuss the indictment, Father," Caleb said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The sound seemed to die before it reached the back of the room, swallowed by the heavy velvet drapes. Eleanor smoothed the tablecloth. "The Vanderbilt Gala begins at 8, Caleb. Your tuxedo is pressed." "Mother, the feds are freezing the accounts. They're coming for the house. They're coming for everything." "Appearance is our only currency now," she snapped, her eyes tracking a loose thread on the rug. She began to pick at her cuticle with her thumb, a slow, methodical motion. "If we hide, we admit guilt. Smile for the cameras, and the world believes the lie. We are Sterlings. We do not crumble." Caleb's chest tightened. The air in the house felt thick, depleted of oxygen. He turned away from her polished mask and retreated toward the west wing, the rhythmic thump-click of his crutch on the marble floor sounding like a ticking clock. He needed to leave. The realization hadn't come as a spark, but as a slow, freezing realization that he was standing on a sinking ship. He reached Arthur's private study, a room that smelled of stale scotch and old paper. He needed his passport. It was the only key left to a world where his name didn't trigger a federal investigation. Caleb yanked open the desk drawers, scavenging through ledgers and fountain pens. His fingers brushed a cold brass latch hidden beneath the velvet lining of the bottom drawer. He remembered this from when he was a child. The secret spot where Arthur kept the things that didn't belong on a balance sheet. He pressed the spring. A false floor clicked upward, revealing a leather-bound folder. He pulled it out, expecting the gold-embossed cover of his passport. Instead, his eyes fell upon a legal document, its ink fresh, its implications devastating. It was a key person life insurance policy. $20 million. The insured, Caleb Sterling. The beneficiaries, Arthur and Eleanor Sterling. The date on the policy was only 3 weeks old. Caleb's pulse drummed against his fingertips. He felt a cold sweat break across his brow. 94, 3 bars. 94, 3 bars, he muttered. But the numbers didn't steady him this time. The paper felt heavy, like a lead weight in his hands. He looked at the signature, his father's bold, looping script. It wasn't just a safety net. It was a bounty. A floorboard creaked behind him. Caleb spun around, his crutch slipping on the polished wood. A shadow detached itself from the doorway. A man stood there, his face obscured by a dark, knit mask. He didn't look like a professional. He looked like a nightmare conjured from the grease and grime of a garage. He smelled of motor oil and old sweat. The intruder didn't speak. He lunged. Caleb's world narrowed to the sound of his own ragged breathing and the heavy thud of boots. The man swung a gloved fist, catching Caleb in the shoulder and sending him sprawling against the mahogany desk. Pain flared in his shattered leg, a white-hot scream of nerves. "Get out!" Caleb wheezed. But the man was already on him again. Caleb gripped the neck of his aluminum crutch like a club. As the attacker reached for his throat, Caleb swung with every ounce of desperation he possessed. The metal bar connected with the man's ribs with a sickening crunch. The intruder gasped, stumbling back toward the French doors that led to the terrace. Caleb didn't stop. He pushed off the desk, ignoring the agony in his leg, and shoved the end of the crutch into the man's chest. The glass of the doors shattered, a sound like 1,000 diamonds hitting the floor. The intruder tumbled backward into the darkness of the rainy night, disappearing into the shadows of the boxwood hedges. Caleb slumped against the doorframe, gasping for air. His hand was shaking so hard he almost dropped his phone. 82%, he whispered. 82. He looked down at the floor. In the struggle, something had fallen from the intruder's pocket. A small, crumpled slip of paper. Caleb picked it up. It was a receipt from a local auto body shop, Miller's Mechanics, with an address scrawled in grease-stained pencil. Before he could process the lead, the lights in the hallway flickered and died, then surged back to a blinding brilliance. "Caleb? What on earth was that noise?" Eleanor stood in the doorway, her silk dress shimmering under the chandelier. She looked at the shattered glass, then at the blood on Caleb's knuckles. She didn't scream. She didn't run to him. She simply stood there, her face a mask of mild annoyance. There was someone here. Caleb panted, clutching the insurance policy to his chest. "A man. He attacked me." Eleanor walked forward, her heels clicking on the glass shards. She didn't seem to notice the danger. "Oh, that," she said, her voice smooth and cold as a river stone. "That was just Gary, the gardener. I asked him to test the new sensor triggers. You've been so paranoid lately, Caleb. I thought a live drill would prove the system works." She smiled, but her eyes remained fixed on the document in his hand. Her thumb began to pick at her cuticle again. A small bead of red appeared on her skin. "A test?" Caleb's voice cracked. "He tried to kill me, Mother." "Don't be dramatic, dear. It's bad for the complexion. Now, give me those papers. They're private business of your father's." She reached out, her hand steady, her red thumb leaving a tiny smear of blood on the edge of the insurance policy. In that moment, Caleb didn't see his mother. He saw a predator who had finally stopped pretending she wasn't hungry. The house grew silent after Eleanor retreated, but it was a heavy, artificial silence. Caleb sat in his room, the door locked, his back against the wood. He had checked the signal strength 5 times in the last 10 minutes. 0 bars, he whispered. 0 bars. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They had turned on the jammer. The estate was a dead zone. He was trapped in a 3-story cage of limestone and lies. A soft knock at the door made him jump. "Caleb, it's me." Arthur's voice sounded muffled, older. Caleb didn't open the door. "The court moved the date, son," Arthur said through the wood. "The feds. They aren't waiting. We have 48 hours to settle the accounts, or I'm going away for a long time. Forever, maybe." Caleb heard a heavy sigh, followed by the rustle of paper. Arthur probably sorting his sugar packets. "We need a solution, Caleb. A permanent one. The family name has to mean something when the dust settles." "Go away, Father," Caleb said, his voice trembling. "I'm trying to save us," Arthur insisted, his voice rising. "I've always tried to fix things. You don't understand the pressure of keeping a ceiling over your head." The footsteps faded away, leaving Caleb alone with the humming of the walls. He needed to reach Marcus Thorne, his only friend and the only lawyer who wasn't on the family payroll. But with the jammer active, his phone was just a glass brick. He waited until the house felt truly asleep, the kind of stillness that only comes at 3 a.m. He crept out of his room, his crutch muffled by a woolen sock he'd taped to the base. He needed to get to the garage. If he could get to his car, he could drive until he hit a signal, or better yet, drive until he hit the state line. The garage was a cavern of polished concrete and the smell of expensive rubber. His sedan sat in the center, looking like a sleek beast under the fluorescent lights. Caleb leaned over the hood, catching his breath. "Looking for something?" Arthur appeared from behind a stack of winter tires. He was holding a heavy industrial jack, the metal glinting dully. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie loosened. "I'm leaving, Dad. Now." "The car isn't ready, Caleb. It's unsafe." Arthur took a step forward. He didn't look like a fixer anymore. He looked like a man who had run out of options. He stumbled, or perhaps he didn't, and the heavy iron jack slipped from his hands. It whistled through the air, a heavy, spinning blur of black metal. Caleb lunged to the side, his bad leg buckling. The jack slammed into the concrete exactly where his good ankle had been a second before. The impact cracked the floor, a sound like a gunshot echoing through the garage. "Oops," Arthur whispered. "My hands. They're so shaky these days." Caleb didn't wait for an apology. He scrambled across the floor, his palms sliding on a patch of leaked oil. The scent of grease and fear filled his nostrils. He hauled himself up using the workbench and ducked through the side door into the garden tool shed. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and fertilizer. He fumbled for a light, his hand hitting a plastic bin. It toppled over, spilling Eleanor's gardening tools across the floor. Among the trowels and gloves, something caught the light, a small brown vial. Caleb picked it up. The label was handwritten in his mother's elegant script, soporific, heavy dose. It was a powerful sedative, the kind used to knock out a horse. His stomach turned. This wasn't just about a test or an accident in the garage. They were planning to drug him. A drugged man doesn't fight back when a car veers off a cliff. A drugged man looks like a suicide. He looked out the shed window. In the driveway, a replacement car sat waiting. A nondescript SUV they'd bought to replace his wrecked sedan. Caleb felt a cold dread settle in his marrow. He crawled out of the shed, staying low in the shadows of the hedges, and reached the underside of the SUV. He reached up, his fingers searching the fuel line. His hand brushed something that didn't belong, a small plastic box with a tangle of wires, held in place by a heavy magnet. It was a remote start incendiary device. They weren't just going to wait for an accident. They were going to trigger one. Subverted beat 1.10. Caleb retreated from the garage, his breath coming in shallow, jagged hitches. He knew he needed leverage. Something more than a vial of pills or a hidden bomb. He needed the narrative. If he could find the why, he could perhaps find a way to stop them. He bypassed the main stairs and took the service lift to the 3rd floor, slipping into Eleanor's suite. The room smelled of expensive jasmine and the metallic tang of blood from her constant picking. He went straight for her vanity, a sprawling mahogany piece topped with crystal bottles. He began to search the drawers, his movements frantic but precise. In the bottom drawer, tucked behind a silk scarf, he found a single sheet of stationery. His heart stopped. It was a suicide note. It was written in his own handwriting, the same slanted S, the same way he looped his Ys. It was a masterpiece of forgery. "I can't live with the shame of what my father did," the note read. "The Sterling name is a shroud, and I am suffocating under it. This is the only way out." Caleb felt a surge of cold, analytical clarity. This was the missing piece. He didn't just have evidence of a crime. He had the script for his own death. If he took this to the police, the insurance policy and the bomb would make sense. This was his shield. He tucked the note into his inner jacket pocket, feeling a wave of relief. He had them. He had the proof that would put them away and save his life. He turned to leave, but the bedroom door groaned open. Eleanor stood there, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied. "You found it," she said, her voice a soft melody. "I knew you would. You were always such a curious boy, Caleb. Always looking for the data behind the screen." "This is over, Mother," Caleb said, his voice regaining its strength. "I have the note. I have the vial. I'm going to the police the second I get off this property." Eleanor stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She didn't look afraid. She reached out and touched the vanity, her red thumb trailing across the wood. "Oh, Caleb, you think you've outsmarted me? You think I'd leave a fake note in a place you could find so easily if I didn't want you to have it?" Caleb's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "Check the ink, dear," she whispered. Caleb pulled the note out. He looked at it closely under the vanity lamp. The ink was still slightly wet in the loops of the letters. But as he stared, he noticed something else. The paper wasn't just stationery. It was a legal affidavit, and his signature at the bottom, the one he thought was part of the suicide note, was actually at the bottom of a confession for Arthur's fraud. "I didn't just forge a suicide note, Caleb," Eleanor said, her smile widening. "I used a chemical transfer. When you touched that paper, your fingerprints, and only your fingerprints, were pressed into a document that admits you were the one who moved the money. You didn't find my trap. You just walked into the center of it and signed your name in oil." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Caleb's feet. He looked at his fingers. A faint, silvery residue clung to his tips. The transfer chemical. By grabbing the evidence, he had just handled the very document that would frame him for his father's crimes. If he died now, he wouldn't die as a victim. He would die as the guilty son who took his own life to escape prison, leaving his grieving parents with $20 million and a clean slate. "Now," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper, "be a good boy and give the paper back. We have a schedule to keep." The storm broke over the estate with a violence that felt personal. Thunder shook the foundations of the manor, a deep, guttural roar that drowned out the ticking of the grandfather clock. A jagged spear of lightning struck the main transformer at the edge of the woods. Inside, the world vanished. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of the security panels, the soft amber light of the chandeliers, all of it died in a single, agonizing breath. Caleb stood in the center of the pitch-black hallway. The air smelled of scorched dust and ozone. 94%, he whispered, his phone screen the only light in the universe. 94%. He was physically isolated now. The road would be a river of mud, and the house was a tomb. Subverted beat 3.2. He knew he had one chance. In the servants' quarters, there was an old emergency transmitter, a relic from the Cold War that Arthur had kept for emergencies. It operated on a frequency the jammer might not be able to touch. Caleb crawled through the dark, his hands grazing the cold, damp wallpaper. He found the unit in the back of a linen closet. It was a heavy, olive-drab box that smelled of old vacuum tubes. He hooked his phone into the data port using a frayed adapter. "Come on," he hissed. "Just one burst." The screen flickered. Signal acquired. He hit send. The files, the photos of the insurance policy, the recording of Eleanor in the bedroom, began to upload to Marcus Thorne's secure server. The progress bar crept forward. 10%, 50, 80. "Yes," Caleb breathed. "Yes." At 99%, the transmitter began to hum, a high-pitched, agonizing shriek that vibrated in Caleb's teeth. A puff of acrid blue smoke curled from the vents. The ancient hardware couldn't handle the modern data load. The screen flashed. "Upload complete." Caleb slumped back, a sob of relief breaking from his throat. It was done. The truth was out. Marcus would have the files. The police would be on their way. He had won. He felt his shoulders drop, the tension of the last 3 days finally beginning to dissolve. "Caleb, are you in there?" Arthur was standing in the doorway, holding a flashlight. The beam cut through the smoke. He looked at the smoking transmitter, then at Caleb's phone. "You sent it, didn't you?" Arthur asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was hollow. "It's over, Dad. Marcus has everything." Arthur began to laugh. It was a dry, hacking sound. "Marcus Thorne? Caleb? Who do you think handled the paperwork for the insurance policy? Who do you think set up the shell accounts you just confessed to?" Caleb's heart froze. "No. He's my friend." "Marcus is a businessman," Arthur said, stepping into the room. "The secure server you just sent those files to? It's not a law office. It's a private cloud owned by the Sterling Trust. You didn't send the evidence to a savior. You just handed the only copies of our crimes directly back to your mother." Arthur held up his own phone. A notification glowed on the screen. "File received. Encryption active." Caleb stared at the smoking box. He hadn't sent a flare. He had sent his only weapon back into the enemy's armory. He was more alone than he had been 10 minutes ago, and now they knew exactly what he had found. "Dinner is served." Eleanor's voice drifted up the stairs, as calm as if it were a Sunday afternoon. Arthur gripped Caleb's arm. His grip was surprisingly strong, the desperate strength of a drowning man. He marched Caleb down to the dining room. The room was lit by a dozen tall beeswax candles, their flames dancing in the drafts from the storm. The table was set with the family's finest china, white bone with a gold rim. In the center sat a bottle of vintage scotch and 3 glasses. "Sit," Eleanor commanded. She was already eating, her movements graceful. "I'm not hungry," Caleb said, his voice a ghost. "The scotch, then." Arthur said, pouring a heavy measure into a glass. The liquid was dark, like old blood. He pushed it toward Caleb. It'll calm your nerves. You've had a difficult day. Caleb looked at the glass. He could see a faint, cloudy residue at the bottom, the crushed sedatives from the garden shed. Drink it, Caleb, Arthur said. He stepped behind Caleb's chair, his hands heavy on Caleb's shoulders. Let's end this like a family. With dignity. Dignity! Caleb spat. You're trying to murder your son for a payout. Arthur's face contorted. He grabbed the glass and tried to force it against Caleb's lips. It's for the name. It's for the legacy. Caleb fought back, his crutch clattering to the floor. They struggled across the table, the fine china shattering under their weight. A plate flew off and smashed against the sideboard, a sound like a bone breaking. The scotch spilled, soaking Caleb's shirt, the smell of peat and medicine filling the air. Do it, Arthur! Eleanor screamed, dropping her mask. She stood at the head of the table, her face twisted into a snarl. He's a liability. He's always been a liability. Caleb shoved Arthur back, sending him stumbling into the heavy oak table. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes wide. You're the one who cut the lines. Not Gary. Not Dad. Eleanor laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. Arthur doesn't have the stomach for it. He's a fixer, Caleb. I'm a survivor. I watched my mother die in a hovel because she couldn't keep up appearances. I will not die in a hovel. If it takes your life to keep this house, then that is the price of the mortgage. She looked at Arthur with pure contempt. And don't think you're safe, Arthur. Once the insurance pays out, do you think I need a disgraced fraudster dragging me down? You're just the next line on the balance sheet. Arthur froze, the glass in his hand trembling. The betrayal in his eyes was almost as deep as Caleb's. But the moment of realization was short-lived. Arthur, driven by a lifetime of obedience and fear, turned his rage back toward the easiest target. He lunged at Caleb, his fist connecting with Caleb's temple. The world went gray. Caleb felt himself being dragged, his heels scraping against the marble. He heard the heavy thud of a door, the sliding of a bolt. Then, darkness. Cold, damp, and absolute. Caleb woke to the sound of his own pulse. He was in the basement, the air smelling of wet concrete and old coal. His head throbbed, a rhythmic hammer against his skull. He looked up. A faint light flickered through the floor vent in the ceiling. He could hear footsteps above him, Eleanor's sharp, rhythmic clicking. Then came a new sound, a liquid slosh, slosh, slosh. He dragged himself toward the laundry chute that emptied into the corner of the basement. A clear, pungent liquid was pouring down the metal slide, pooling on the floorboards. Gasoline. The scent was overwhelming, a sharp, chemical sting that made his eyes water. She's burning it, Caleb whispered. She's burning it all. He lunged for the basement door, but it was a reinforced security door designed to keep out intruders. Now, it was keeping him in. He pounded on the steel, the sound muffled by the thick walls. Above him, he heard the scratch of a match. He had to move. He had to think like a system, not like a victim. He pulled his phone from his pocket. 12%, he gasped. 12%. He didn't have a signal, but he had the house. He had designed the smart lock protocols when he was 19, a summer project to impress a father who never noticed. He knew the back door in the code, a physical bypass designed for fire emergencies. He tore the plastic cover off the wall-mounted thermostat. Behind it lay a nest of wires. He didn't need a screen. He needed a spark. He stripped 2 wires with his teeth, the copper tasting like pennies. Come on, he prayed. He touched the wires together. A spark erupted, blue and bright, stinging his fingers. Above him, the electronic lock on the basement door shrieked. The magnetic seal broke with a heavy thunk. Caleb threw the door open and scrambled up the stairs just as the first tongue of orange flame licked down the laundry chute. The heat was a physical wall, pushing him back. He reached the dining room. Arthur and Eleanor were there, standing amidst the wreckage of their last supper. They looked like ghosts in the firelight. "You're supposed to be dead," Eleanor hissed, reaching for a heavy silver candelabra to use as a club. Caleb didn't run. He didn't fight. He reached for the wall panel by the kitchen door. "The system is rated for a Category 5 impact," Caleb said, his voice cold and steady. "And for a total fire event." He smashed the red glass of the emergency toggle. Hiss. The halon fire suppression system engaged. A cloud of thick white gas flooded the room, invisible but heavy. It didn't just put out the fire, it pushed the oxygen out of the room. Arthur gasped, clutching his throat. Eleanor fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the air. Caleb held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. He watched them slump to the floor, their faces turning a pale, sickly blue. They weren't dying. The system would cycle before that. But they were neutralized. The predators were finally still. The sun rose over a Connecticut landscape that looked washed clean by the storm. The Sterling estate still stood, though the west wing was a blackened husk and the smell of gasoline lingered in the grass. Caleb sat on the bumper of a police cruiser, a gray wool blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He watched as the officers led Arthur and Eleanor out in handcuffs. They didn't look like socialites anymore. Arthur looked small, his suit wrinkled and stained. Eleanor's hair was a mess, and her red thumb was raw and bleeding, her mask finally, irrevocably shattered. Officer Hudson approached Caleb, his boots crunching on the gravel. He didn't offer a hug or a platitude. He just stood there, humming a low, mournful tune that Caleb recognized as a funeral dirge. "We found the files, son," Hudson said. "And the note. The real one." Caleb looked at him. "How?" "You didn't just send them to Marcus Thorne," Hudson said, a ghost of a smile on his tired face. "You set a delay send to the precinct. Smart kid. You knew they'd intercept the first one." Caleb looked at his phone. 1%, he whispered. He stood up, his crutch feeling lighter than it ever had. He looked at the house, the blank spines of the books, the cold limestone, the $20 million lie. "Keep it," Caleb said to the lawyers who had gathered like vultures on the lawn. "Sell it for pennies. I don't want a cent." He walked toward Marcus Thorne, who was standing by the gate. Marcus looked at him, his eyes darting to the crooked line of the police tape. 12, 13, 14. Marcus muttered, counting the paces. "I'm going to Ohio, Marcus," Caleb said. "Why Ohio?" "Because it's flat," Caleb said, "and because nobody there knows my name." He got into a waiting car and didn't look back. As the estate vanished in the rearview mirror, Caleb felt a strange, terrifying sensation in his chest. It took him a mile to realize what it was. He was breathing. And for the first time in 26 years, the air didn't taste like a secret. The end. Do not proceed past this point.